11:47 p.m., kitchen dark, porch light off. Caleb Dunning was lying on top of the covers, still dressed, boots and all, because taking them off felt like admitting the day was done, and he wasn't ready for that yet. The knocking started low. 2 hits, then 3, then something that wasn't knocking anymore. It was the flat of a hand against wood, over and over, the kind of sound a person makes when they've even out of choices, and a door is the last one left. A black man living alone with his 6-year-old daughter does not open his front door at midnight without thinking about it first. He thought about it, then he opened it anyway. Nora Beckett stood on his porch with rain running off her jacket and sheets. Her boots were caked past the ankle. Her hair, blonde, dark at the roots from the wet, was stuck flat to her neck. She was gripping a brown envelope against her chest with both hands. The way you hold something when letting go of means letting go of everything. She lived across the county road. Her father's land started where Caleb's ended. That was about as close as the two of them had ever been. A wave from a truck window, a nod at the hardware. Tonight, she was not waving. She looked him straight in the face and said 6 words that didn't make any sense at all. Anid stood in the doorway. Rain hit the boards behind her. Somewhere inside the house, the hallway clock, the one his mother had hung 30 years ago, and nobody had ever moved, ticked once. Twice, he didn't speak. The words had landed somewhere below his throat and gotten stuck there. Hora's hands were shaking on the envelope. Not a little. The kind of shaking that starts in the fingers and works up through the wrists until it's not really shaking anymore. It's the body trying to hold itself together and running out of reasons. "Come in," he said. "You're soaking wet." She stepped over the threshold. Water ran off her jacket onto the mat. A braided oval his wife Joanne had picked out at a church sale 11 years ago. It had outlasted the marriage, had outlasted Joanne. It would probably outlast him. He grabbed a towel from the laundry basket by the hall closet and held it out. Nora took it, pressed it to her face, held it there a second too long. When she pulled it away, her eyes were red but dry. "I know what this sounds like," she said. "You don't know what it sounds like yet. Come sit down." He walked her into the kitchen, filled the kettle, set 2 mugs on the table. The table where he'd sat with his wife's oncologist 18 months ago. The table where he'd signed the second equipment loan 9 months after that. The one for $47,000 that was now 2 payments behind. It was a table that had seen a lot of bad math. Nora sat. She set the brown envelope between them like it might move on its own. On her way in, she had brushed against the wind chime hanging from the porch beam. A copper one, handmade, 5 tubes on a leather cord. It hadn't made a sound. Caleb had tied the clapper down with wire 2 winters ago. The chime had been a gift from Arthur Beckett, Nora's father, the week Joanne died. Caleb couldn't stand the sound of it after that. Couldn't take it down either. He'd silenced it and left it hanging, which, if he'd been the kind of man who thought about metaphors, would have told him something. He wasn't that kind of man. He poured the water. Nora opened the envelope. Inside was a sheaf of legal pages. Soft at the corners from the rain and one loose sheet of plain notepaper he recognized before she turned it over. Arthur Beckett's careful, slanted print. A man had been dead since April, and his handwriting still looked like he'd be back any minute. "My father's will," Nora said, the real one, not the version the lawyer read to me in the spring. There was a part he left out. There usually is. She ran her finger down a page until it stopped on a paragraph flagged with a blue tab. Her voice stayed level, but her jaw was tight. "If I don't have a marriage license filed before close of business next Friday, operational control of the Beckett farm transfers to Warren. Full authority. Land, cattle, equipment, accounts, everything. Warren." The name dropped into the kitchen like a stone into still water. Warren Beckett had left the county 6 years ago in a leased sedan and hadn't come back until this morning, apparently in a brand new pickup with brand new boots and a real estate developer already on speed dial. Caleb didn't know all the details. He knew enough. He showed up at 7 a.m., Nora said. Walked through the barns like he was measuring for curtains. Has got a man named Dale Morrow lined up. Some kind of land company out of the city. They want to walk the property this week. Subdivide. House lots, Caleb said. She nodded. He didn't drink his coffee. He had seen that math play out twice in this county already. A working pasture becomes an acreage. Peaked. An acreage becomes a survey map. A survey map becomes 30 houses and a drainage problem. And the family that built the fence line is living in a rental somewhere pretending it doesn't hurt. Warren took my truck keys this afternoon, Nora said. Told me so I would start thinking about where I'm going to live. I walked here from the road, 2.5 miles in this. She gestured at herself. Soaked jacket, the mud, the rain, still dripping off her cuffs onto his kitchen floor. Caleb looked at the notepaper. Arthur's handwriting. What does it say? Nora picked it up. She read it the way a person reads something they've already memorized. Quiet, steady, like she was hearing her father's voice come through the paper one more time. The word said this, that if anything happened, Nora should go to the man across the road, packed, that he was the kind of man who understood what land meant and what people were worth, that he would not try to control her or deceive her, that she could count on him to say hard things when hard things needed saying. Arthur Beckett had written those words in his own hand and left them sealed with his lawyer, and the lawyer had given them to Nora that afternoon, after Warren left the office. The kitchen got very still. Caleb looked at the table. He looked at his hands. He did not look at Nora because he was not sure what his face would do. Arthur, the man had sat on this porch the week Joanne died, had said almost nothing, had brought a plate of biscuits his wife used to make before she passed too, and set them on the railing and sat in the chair and watched the fields go dark. Had come back 3 days later and done the same thing. No advice, no scripture, no casserole speech, just presence. And before that, years before, when Caleb's father was put on hospice, Arthur had walked across his own pasture carrying a tin of cookies and sat with Caleb's mother until she stopped shaking. He had no business writing those words about Caleb, and he had been exactly right to write them. He shouldn't have asked that of you, Caleb said, and he shouldn't have asked it of me. He didn't ask anything of you. Not yet. Nora folded her hands flat on the table. Him the one asking. There it was. She did not soften it, did not wrap it in anything. She had walked 2.5 miles in a rainstorm at midnight to say it, and now she said it. 6 days, Caleb. That's what I have. Him not asking you to love me. Him not asking for a life. Him asking for a signature on a form so my brother can't turn my father's land into a parking lot. He'll take the room at the end of your hall. He'll carry my share. When the estate clears and the farm is secure, we sit down and figure out what comes next. Together. But I had to come tonight because I don't have until next month. I have 6 days. Caleb shut his eyes. Pirates. He thought about the ranch. He'd been running on pride and prayer for 3 years. He thought about the $47,000 he owed on equipment that was already starting to rust. He thought about the way certain people in this town looked at him in the feed aisle. Polite on top, something else underneath. He thought about what a black man marrying a white woman from the Beckett place in 6 days would do to every one of those looks. He thought about Arthur sitting in the chair on his porch saying nothing. And then he thought about his daughter, a small sound on the stairs. He opened his eyes. Lily was standing on the 3rd step from the bottom, green pajamas, one hand on the railing, hair pressed flat on the left side from the pillow. She was watching Nora the way she watched anything unfamiliar, from a distance, with both eyes wide open and her whole body very still. Daddy. Who's the lady? Cora turned in her chair. She did not stand up, did not lean forward, did not reach. She folded her hands a little tighter and waited. Caleb felt something shift behind his ribs. This woman had read his daughter in 2 seconds and known the one thing most adults never figure out. Don't crowd a careful child. This is Miss Nora, Caleb said. She lives on the farm across the road. You remember her daddy, Mr. Arthur, who carved you that little wooden horse last Christmas. Lily nodded. Slow. He was kind. He was. Miss Nora had a hard night. She's going to sit at our table for a bit. Then you and I are going back upstairs. All right? Lily thought about that. 6 years old in pajamas at midnight, and she considered the 2 adults in front of her with the seriousness of a judge reviewing evidence. Then she came down 2 more steps, walked across the kitchen floor, and held out the stuffed rabbit she had been pressing against her side. A gray thing with one ear longer than the other, loved down to the seams. You can have him for tonight, Lily said. He's good at hard nights. Nora took the rabbit with both hands. Her throat moved. Thank you, sweetheart. Lily nodded once, satisfied, and looked at Caleb. He walked her back upstairs, tucked the blanket kissed her forehead, told her 2 things that were true and 1 thing that was a promise, the way he did every night. Stood in her doorway an extra breath before pulling it half shut. When he came back down, Nora was holding the rabbit on her lap, crying without making any sound at all. The tears ran down, and she didn't wipe them. Caleb sat across from her. He waited until she was done. "If I do this," he said, "there's one condition. Inside this house, between you and me, everything is true. No lies. Not at this table, not in that hallway. Out there, we do what we have to do to keep your father's place out of your brother's hands. But in here, the doors stay open and the words stay straight." She nodded. He wasn't finished. "And the second you walk through that door, you understand something. Lily is the priority. Above the farm, above me, above every deadline on every piece of paper your lawyer owns. The moment any part of this arrangement starts to damage her, we stop. We find another path." No argument. Nora met his eyes. "Tell me," he said, out loud, "so I hear it. Lily is the priority, above everything." Caleb let out a breath he'd been holding since the knocking started. He reached across the table and set 2 fingers on the back of her hand. Brief, not a promise, just an acknowledgement. Harken. They were sitting on the same side of this thing now, whatever this thing turned out to be. "Then we go to the courthouse first thing in the morning," he said. Before Nora went down the hall to the spare room, she stopped at the bottom of the stairs. She bent down and set the rabbit on the 3rd step, right where Lily would find it on her way to breakfast. Then she disappeared down the hallway. The door closed. Soft. Caleb sat at the kitchen table alone. He looked at the copper wind chime through the window, still tied, still silent, and he listened to the rain working against the glass. And he did not sleep for a very long time. The morning came in cold and scrubbed, the way mornings do after a storm has spent itself in the dark. Caleb put on the navy shirt, the one Joanne had bought him for somebody else's wedding. He couldn't remember whose anymore. Pod had kept it in the back of the closet for 3 years. It still smelled faintly like the cedar block shed tucked into the pocket. Nora came down the hall in a pale dress shed, pulled from a duffel bag and pressed flat with steam from his kitchen kettle. She looked tired. She looked like a woman who had decided something and was not going to undecide it. Lily wore her good shoes. Caleb had told her, in the simplest words he had, that today Daddy and Miss Nora had some grown-up paperwork to take care of at the courthouse, and that afterward they were all getting pancakes. Lily had accepted this with the practical calm of a child who has learned that grown-ups do strange things and pancakes make up for most of them. The rabbit was under her arm. Shed. Found it on the stair, looked at Nora across the kitchen for a long second, and carried it down without saying a word about it. Shed asked one question, the way Lily always did. Direct, unhurried, aimed right at the center of the thing. "Is Miss Nora going to live in our house?" For a while, Caleb had said, "in the spare room." Lily had thought about that, nodded once. Gone to find her shoes, drove to town in his pickup with the heater running too high. Nobody said much. Nora looked out the passenger window at the wet fields rolling past, the Beckett fence line on the left, then the Miller place, then the long curve before town. Lily sat between them in her booster, humming something small to herself, the rabbit on her lap. At the courthouse, the clerk slid the forms across a laminate counter. Caleb wrote his name, Caleb James Dunning, in the block. Nora wrote hers beside it, Nora Ann Beckett. Her pen hesitated on the last letter, just for a half second. Then she pressed down and finished. A judge with reading glasses and a patient voice said the words in a side room with fluorescent lights and a calendar from last year still pinned to the wall. Caleb held Nora's hand because the script required it. Her fingers were cold. His were rough. Lily stood between them holding the rabbit by one ear, watching everything with the focus of a child who intended to remember this later. When the judge finished, Nora looked at the silver band Caleb had slid onto her finger. Plain, no stone, bought at the hardware store because the hardware store was the only place open at 7:15 in the morning. And then up at him. "What now?" she said. "We go. Make sure your father's land stays standing." She nodded. Her eyes held on his face a beat longer than the words needed. And in that extra second, Caleb understood something he was not prepared to name. This thing, the sign, was not going to stay the size of the paper it was written on. It was already larger, already breathing. Nora moved into the spare room that afternoon, 2 duffel bags. One cardboard box of documents she didn't trust Warren to leave alone at her father's house. Caleb carried the box. She carried the bags. The spare room had a window facing the east pasture and a quilt his mother had stitched the winter his father was laid up with a herniated disc. Caleb set the box on the foot of the bed and stood there a beat too long because he had not had another adult sleep under this roof since the night Joanne came home from the hospital for the last time. And the room felt different with someone else's weight in it. Bathrooms across the hall. He said, "Closet door sticks. He'll fix it this week. You don't have to keep making excuses for the house, Caleb. It's a good house." I wasn't making excuses. I was giving instructions. She almost laughed. It was the first sound close to laughter he'd heard from her, and it caught them both off guard. A small, startled thing that disappeared before either of them could decide what to do with it. Prompting. The next morning, Lily came downstairs in her school clothes and stopped at the bottom step. Nora was already at the kitchen table. Coffee between her hands, sunlight on the side of her face. Lily looked at her for a long time. Then she walked the rest of the way down, the careful courage of a small person doing something deliberate. "Are you my new mama?" Caleb, at the stove, spatula in hand, felt his chest lock up. Nora set the mug down. She didn't stand, didn't lean across the table. She lowered herself in the chair until her eyes were level with Lily's, put both hands flat on her own knees. "No, honey, I'm not. Your mama was your mama. Nobody else gets that job, ever. Miss Nora. Your daddy's friend, and it'd like to be your friend too if you'll let me." Lily waited with the gravity she brought to all-important questions. "Then, the rabbit can sleep in your room sometimes. He doesn't mind." "That's very kind of you." Daddy says kind is when you share something you actually want to keep. Your daddy knows what he's talking about. Lily climbed into her chair. Caleb turned back to the stove because his throat had done something he wasn't ready to examine. By mid-morning, the whole county knew. That was how small towns worked. Not through malice, just through proximity. By the time Caleb parked outside the feed store, 3 different trucks had slowed on the county road to see who was sitting in his passenger seat. Inside, old Mrs. Fenton watched Nora walk through the door with the measured calm of a woman who'd survived 62 years in a town this size by minding her own business louder than anyone else. "Well," Mrs. Fenton said, "that was quick." Nora's cheeks went hot. Caleb set a bag of mineral supplement on the counter. "I need 2 more of these." Mrs. Fenton rang it up. Her eyes moved between them once. "Congratulations, I guess." "Thank you," Nora said, very soft. In the lot outside, 2 men by the propane cage stopped talking when Nora walked past. One touched his cap toward Caleb, the polite kind of gesture that could mean anything. The other didn't move at all. "Everyone thinks this is a joke," Nora said when they were back in the truck. "Everyone's curious. That's different. Doesn't feel different. It isn't the same thing. And some of those looks weren't about the wedding." He said it plain, because she needed to hear it. Plain. Nora turned her face to the window. She didn't answer, he didn't push. He knew the shape of those looks better than she ever would, and there was nothing to gain from explaining something she'd learn on her own soon enough. That afternoon, Warren's new truck appeared at the Beckett farm like a flag being planted. He was standing in the yard near the equipment shed, hands in his coat pocket, talking to 2 of the ranch hands with the easy posture of a man who already considered this his property. Beside him, and this was the part that made Caleb's jaw tighten, stood a man in a charcoal sport coat and shoes so clean they looked like they'd been delivered that morning. Dale Morrow. Had to be. Nobody from this county wore shoes like that on a Tuesday. Warren turned when he saw them. The smile was warm, the eyes were not. There they are, the newlyweds. Nora's grip on her clipboard went white. Warren stepped forward and looked Caleb up and down. Slowly, the way you inspect something you're about to bid on. Smart play, Dunning. Marry the little sister, and suddenly you're standing on Beckett land like you grew up here. The 2 ranch hands looked at the ground. That was the part Caleb noticed. Good men. But they were watching to see who carried weight now. Caleb's hand tightened at his side, then opened. Had learned a long time ago in the hard way that anger didn't mend a fence post or settle a debt or win an argument in front of people who were still deciding whose orders to follow. "I'm standing with my wife," he said. "That's all." Nora glanced at him. The word had landed between them differently than it had at the courthouse. Heavier, Less paper. More floor. Warren rolled his eyes and turned toward the workers. Nobody moves anything, nobody changes anything on this property until the estate sorts out this mess. We clear? That's not your call, Nora said. Warren looked amused. Bail Morrow, standing 3 feet behind him, said nothing. He didn't need to. He was watching the exchange the way a man watches an auction. Patient, calculating, waiting for the price to drop. Nora held. Warren shrugged and walked toward his truck. Dale followed, but Dale stopped just for a second next to Caleb. Close enough to speak without raising his voice. Mr. Dunning, I've acquired 2 properties in the last 18 months. Every seller said no at first. He smiled, thin, professional, clean. It's always a question of when, not if. He walked on. Caleb watched him go, filed the words. After they left, Nora walked into the barn and gripped the edge of a stall door so hard the wood groaned. Could have said something to him, she said. You just stood there. I stood beside you. You did the talking. Why? Because if I answer for you, every person on this place learned to look at me when the pressure comes. You don't need to I. She didn't like that. He watched her work through it, jaw tight, eyes hot. Then the breath left her, and she nodded. Once that afternoon, Judge Purcell called. Warren had filed a formal challenge to the marriage. A compliance review had been scheduled. Nora would have several weeks to demonstrate she was operating the farm in good faith. If she couldn't, Warren would inherit primary control. Build your case, Purcell said. Bring me everything. Nora set the phone down and looked at Caleb across the kitchen table. All right, she said. All right. 2 days later, along the west fence line, Holt, the oldest hand on the Beckett payroll, asked Caleb about a corner brace instead of asking Nora. Caleb bent down, picked at the mud on his boot, took his time, said nothing. Nora stood there, her face flushed. First embarrassment, then something harder. She turned to Holt. Pull the brace. Set a new one. If we patch it, it'll be back out here in 10 days doing the same job twice. That'll run more, Holt said. I know what it will run. Do it right. Holt shifted his weight, looked at her, looked at Caleb, who was still examining his boot, like it held the answers to something. Then Holt nodded. Slow. Yes, Mom. When he walked off, Nora turned on. Caleb, that was terrible. Yes, it was. A pause. Then very quietly, but he listened. He did. That week, Vera Sims, Lily's teacher at the elementary school, caught Caleb at the pickup line. Vera was 61, had taught 3 generations of children in this county, and had the kind of face that made lying pointless. Lily drew something interesting today, Vera said. She leaned against the chain-link fence, 3 people standing in front of a house. A tall man with a hat, a woman with yellow hair, and a smaller person between them holding a rabbit. Caleb didn't say anything for a moment. She drew that on her own, unprompted. During free time, she wrote her name at the top, and underneath, in her very best printing, she wrote our house. Caleb felt the back of his neck go warm. Vera watched him. Children see what's true before we do, she said, every time. They don't have enough practice lying to themselves yet. She patted his arm once and walked back inside. Caleb stood at the fence for a long time after that. That evening, Nora asked about the photo frame in the living room, the one lying face down on the shelf above the TV. A family picture, Caleb, Joanne, Lily as a baby. Lily answered before Caleb could. Daddy put it down a long time ago. Caleb changed the subject. Nora let him, but her eyes stayed on the frame for a second. The way you look at a door someone has closed, and you're trying to decide whether it's locked or just shut. Later that week, Nora found it. She was going through the box of Arthur's papers, invoices, permits, herd records, when a small notebook fell out from between 2 folders. Arthur's handwriting, dates going back nearly 2 years. She read it at the kitchen table after Lily was asleep. Then she called Kayla Log, she said. Her voice was flat, controlled, every call, every offer. Dale Morrow first contacted Warren 22 months ago, while my father was still alive, while he was still running the place. Caleb sat down, and in the margin right here, Nora tapped the page. Her finger was steady, but her jaw was not. My father wrote this. Warren called Morrow before I was even sick, already planning. The kitchen was quiet. Your father knew, Caleb said. He knew, and he couldn't stop it. So he put the condition in the will instead. He wasn't being old-fashioned. He was building a wall. Caleb looked at the notebook. Arthur Beckett, careful, patient, thorough, even in betrayal. The man had known his own son would sell him out, and instead of confronting it, he'd spent his last months quietly laying bricks around his daughter. He thought about the wind chime on the porch, the one Arthur had made with his hands and given to Caleb the worst week of his life. He thought about the wire he'd used to tie it silent. Lily got sick on a Thursday, came on fast the way kid fevers do. By bedtime, her cheeks were flushed. By midnight, she was burning hot against Caleb's wrist. The fever broke toward morning, came back by lunch, and settled into the kind of stubborn, low-grade heat that meant the body was fighting something it hadn't named yet. Caleb had a delivery at his own ranch that couldn't wait, 60 bales of hay on a truck that was already en route, and a vet visit at the Beckett place that had been scheduled 3 weeks out. He stood in Lily's doorway, hat in both hands, feeling the kind of helplessness he hadn't felt since the worst months with Joanne. "Go!" Norris behind him. He turned. "Caleb, go. He'll call you if anything changes. I've got her." Fly. He looked at her standing in the hallway in jeans and one of his old sweatshirts with the sleeves shoved up past her wrists. He heard himself say, very quietly, "All right." He came back at dusk. The house was warm, quiet, the way a house gets when a child is sleeping and someone is watching over her. Upstairs, Nora was sitting in the chair beside Lily's bed. Her head was tipped against the wall, eyes closed. Lily was asleep on her side. One small hand curled around two of Nora's fingers. A picture book with a dragon on the cover lay open on the blanket. The rabbit was tucked under the quilt next to Lily's shoulder. Nora opened her eyes. She did not move her hand. "Fever broke about an hour ago," she whispered. She drank some broth. Read the dragon book twice. Fell asleep right in the middle of the third time. Caleb nodded. Words "thank you" were somewhere in his chest, but they came out in the wrong shape, too small for what they were carrying, so he said nothing. Later, when he came back upstairs with water, Lily was half awake. She looked at Nora, then at the book, then at Nora again. "My mama had long hair like yours. She had a song about the moon. I can't remember how it goes." Nora's eyes filled. She held it, didn't let it fall. "That's okay, baby. Songs don't get lost. They just go quiet for a while. You'll hear it again when you're ready." Lily closed her eyes. Nora sat very still until Lily's breathing went slow and even. Then she stood up, walked past Caleb in the doorway without looking at him, and went down the hall to the spare room. The door closed. Caleb stood in the hallway for a long time. The next morning, Vera Sims called. Lily had been absent, and Vera was checking in. "She's better," Caleb said. "Fever broke last night." "Good." Vera paused. "She drew something yesterday before she went home sick at the end of art class. It was your porch, the wind chime. And she wrote a note underneath it. It never rings." Caleb held the phone, didn't speak. "She notices things," Vera said gently. "More than you think that." Night after Lily was asleep, Nora asked Caleb to tell her about Joanne. They were sitting at the kitchen table. Rain had started up again, soft this time, a different rain than the one that had brought Nora to his door. The kind of rain that gave permission. Caleb talked. For the first time in 3 years, he talked about her, about the way Joanne had laughed at every one of his bad jokes for the first 6 months they were dating, just out of politeness, and then started telling him to stop when she trusted him enough to be honest. About the diagnosis, winter after, the way the house got quieter by degrees until quiet was all there was. He told Nora about the last good month before the scans came back wrong for the final time, when Joanne had been standing at this sink, folding a dish towel, and had said something so light he'd almost missed it. She had said, "Don't turn fear into a reason not to love Caleb. That's the one thing I need you not to do." Hardy hadn't understood the weight of those words then. He wasn't sure he understood them now. But they'd lived in this kitchen ever since, the way a sound lives in a room after the person who made it is gone. Huh? Nora listened. She did not offer comfort or comparison or any of the things people offer when they want to help but don't know how. She just sat there, hands around her mug, and let him talk until he was done. When he finished, she reached across the table and took his hand. Her fingers were warm. "My father used to say something," she said. "He said you don't get to pick when the door opens. You only get to decide whether you walk through it or stand there watching it close." Caleb felt the corner of his mouth move. That sounds like Arthur. That was Arthur. They sat like that, her hand in his, rain on the glass. Neither of them said anything that couldn't be taken back, but when she stood to go to her room, She didn't let go right away, and he didn't let go either. There was a small, ordinary moment in the kitchen doorway. She leaned her forehead against his shoulder, and he rested his cheek against the top of her hair, and they stood that way long enough for the clock to tick 3 times. Then she stepped back, went down the hall. The door closed. Caleb sat at the table alone. He looked at the wind chime through the window, still tied, still silent. He was starting to wonder who he'd tied it down, for the article ran on page 3 of the county paper, the kind of paper that still landed in driveways every Wednesday morning in a plastic sleeve. The headline didn't say anything directly. It didn't need to. Hard. There was a photo of Caleb and Nora leaving the courthouse. The angle made it look like he was pulling her by the hand, which he hadn't been. The reporter quoted unnamed family members who expressed concern that a hasty arrangement had been made to circumvent the intentions of a recently deceased landowner. The language was careful, the kind of careful that holds up in print while doing its damage underneath. Cross. It suggested, without quite saying, that a young woman from a respected local family may have been persuaded into a legally questionable union by a neighboring property owner facing significant financial difficulties of his own. Warren's name appeared nowhere. It didn't have to. Everybody who read it heard his voice behind it. Caleb read the article twice at the kitchen table. His hands were flat on the surface. He read it the way he read vet bills, slowly, completely absorbing the cost. Then he folded the paper, set it under the coffee grounds in the trash, and washed his hands. Nora came in 2 minutes later in her work jacket. She saw his face. "What happened?" "Nothing that matters right now. Eat something. We need to be at the Beckett place by 8. She looked at him. She looked at the trash can. She didn't push. He was grateful for that, proud, and he hated that he'd started keeping a list of things about her he was grateful for, because that list was getting long and he had not given it permission to exist. Lily came home from school that afternoon, dragging her backpack behind her like it weighed more than she did. She didn't say hello, didn't stop in the kitchen, went straight upstairs and closed her door, which she never did, because Lily was the kind of child who left every door in the house open, including the bathroom, including the refrigerator, including, once, the front door during a rainstorm, because she wanted the porch cat to decide for itself. Caleb set down the wrench he'd been holding, went up. She was on her side, facing the wall. Prop it. The rabbit was tucked behind her back where she couldn't see it, which meant Shed put it there on purpose, and something was wrong enough that even the rabbit couldn't fix it. He sat on the edge of the bed, waited. A boy at school said, "You married Miss Nora for her money." Lily's voice was small and flat. He said, "His mama read it in the paper." He said, "You don't really love her." He said, "The whole thing is pretend." Caleb closed his eyes. The heat started at the base of his neck and climbed, not at the boy. The boy was 7 and was repeating what he'd heard at his own kitchen table. The heat was for the table, for the adults sitting around it, for the casual way people in this town passed judgment over meatloaf and then sent their children to school carrying it. "Daddy." She rolled over. Her eyes were wet, not crying, past crying, kind of wet that happens after a child has already cried alone and cleaned it up and is now just holding the residue. "Do you really love Miss Nora? Or is all of this just pretend?" Of all the questions he'd prepared for, from the lawyer, from Warren, from the town, he had not prepared for this one. Not in his daughter's voice. Not in the room where Joanne had once read Lily to sleep every night, running her fingers through Lily's hair until they both fell asleep and Caleb had to carry Joanne back to their bed. He opened his mouth. Nothing came. The silence stretched. 1 second. 2, 3, long enough for a 6-year-old to notice. Long enough for a 6-year-old to interpret. "I don't know how to answer that the right way yet, baby," he said finally. "But I'm not faking. I can promise you that much. Whatever this is, it's not fake." It was not enough. He saw it in her face, the way her mouth pressed flat and her chin pulled in. She nodded. The brave nod. The one Shed learned at a funeral she was too young to remember properly but old enough to carry. She turned back to the wall. Caleb sat on the edge of the bed with his hands on his knees, and something in the center of his chest cracked. Not broke, cracked. The way a foundation cracks when the weight on it shifts and the concrete hasn't been reinforced in too long. He did not see Nora on the stairs. He found her in the spare room an hour later. The duffel bag was open on the bed. Half her clothes were already inside. Prop she was. She was sitting on the edge of the mattress with her hands folded in her lap. The way a person sits when they've already made the decision and are just waiting for their body to catch up. Nora. I heard her, Caleb. She didn't mean it the way it... She meant it exactly. Says 6. Says getting that thrown at her on a playground because of me. Because I knocked on your door and asked you to do something no one should have to do. Nora. No. Listen. Her voice was very quiet. That was worse than loud. Quiet meant she'd gone past the arguing part and into the part where the words had already been weighed and measured, and there was no more negotiating to do. I came to your door because I was out of options. You opened it. I will never be able to repay what you've done. For me, for my father's land. But I made you a promise the first night I sat at your table, and you made me repeat it back to you. Lily comes before everything. Those were the terms. She zipped the bag. The farm can be lost, Caleb. Your daughter can't. She left a note on the kitchen table on her way out. Caleb heard the engine, not his truck. Someone had dropped off her old car that afternoon, pull onto the county road and fade. Paper. He stood in the kitchen with his hand on the paper. He didn't pick it up. Not yet. Because he already knew what it said, the way you know what a doctor is going to tell you before the doctor says it. Because the face gives it away. Because the silence before the words is louder than the words themselves. And because he understood, in the cold, quiet way a man understands something he should have seen 3 days ago, that he had let this happen by not answering a question when the question was asked. That night, the gate to the south pasture was found open. 9 head of cattle on the road. Rain coming back hard. Holt called at 10:15. Caleb was already pulling on his boots, but Nora was gone. 2 hours. Caleb and Holt and a neighbor named Donovan worked along the drainage ditch in cold drizzle, pushing the cattle back through the broken gate one stubborn animal at a time. Caleb slipped in the mud twice, got up twice. A young steer turned on him near the culvert, shouldered hard into his chest, and he grabbed the fence wire with one hand to keep his feet. The wire cut his palm. He didn't notice until Holt pointed at the blood. When the last cow was through and the chain was set, Caleb stood in the road with rain running down the back of his neck and his cut hand throbbing, and nobody standing beside him except Holt and Donovan and the dark. The space where Nora would have been was louder than the rain. Holt looked at him. Didn't say anything about the hand. Didn't say anything about Nora. Just pulled off his own glove and handed it over. Wrap that up before it gets worse. Caleb took the glove. Thanks, Holt. She'll figure it out, Holt said. Then he walked to his truck and drove off, and Caleb stood in the road alone and realized that was the first time Holt had ever referred to Nora without using her last name. The next morning, Dale Morrow drove up to the Beckett gate, not Warren. Just Dale, alone, in a silver sedan with out-of-county plate. He found Caleb rechaining the south gate, the one that had been opened the night before. Dale got out. He was wearing different shoes this time, still clean but flats instead of dress shoes, a concession to the mud. Maybe the only concession he'd ever made to anything, Mr. Dunning. I heard about the cattle. That's unfortunate. Caleb didn't look up from the chain. I want you to understand something, Dale said. He put his hands in his jacket pockets. His voice was smooth and level. The voice of a man who had learned that volume was unnecessary when money did the talking. I don't have a personal stake. I'm not your enemy. I'm an allocator. Land is an asset. Some assets perform, some don't. Agricultural acreage in this county returns, 2, 3%. Subdivided residential returns 11. The math isn't emotional, it's arithmetic. Caleb finished the chain, stood up, looked at Dale for the first time. You bought 2 other farms in this county. The Patterson place, the Eames land. Dale's expression didn't change. I did. What did you pay? Market rate, 40% below assessed value. That's not market rate, Mr. Morrow. That's a number you offer people who are too tired to negotiate. He paused. Maybe you should ask the Pattersons how they feel about your arithmetic. Last I heard, Tom Patterson is renting a 2-bedroom in Grandin because he can't afford to live in the county he was born in. Dale looked at him for a long moment. Then he smiled the kind of smile that's really just a face rearranging itself around a decision that's already been made. Every seller says no first, Mr. Dunning. I've never met one who didn't come around. He got back in the sedan, drove off. Caleb stood at the gate. Cut hand throbbed inside Holt's borrowed glove. He watched the silver car disappear down the county road and he thought, that man has never lost, and he believes that means he can't. That night, Caleb sat at the kitchen table with Nora's note in front of him. He didn't open it until 2 in the morning. Her handwriting was neat, neater than he expected. Every letter formed with care, the way a person writes when they want the words to outlast the moment. She was sorry. She had meant every word she had said at this table. The deadline could pass without her. The farm could pass with it. None of it, mattered more than a 6-year-old girl's heart. She would not be the reason Lily learned to doubt her father. She had signed it Nora Beckett, not Nora Dunning. Caleb folded the paper into a small square. He sat with it in his hand. The clock ticked. The rain had stopped. Front. The house was the kind of quiet that only happens when someone who was supposed to be in it isn't. He thought about Joanne at the sink, the dish towel, the light through the window. The words Shed said, so gently that he'd almost missed them. The way you almost miss a train because you're standing too close to the tracks to see it coming. Don't turn fear into a reason not to love. 3 years. 3 years he'd used fear as a wall, told himself it was for Lily. Some of it was. Most of it was just him, standing in the wreckage of the last time he'd let someone all the way in, looking at the cost, and deciding he couldn't afford it again. But the cost of not loving was sitting in his hand right now, folded into a square, signed with the wrong last name. He stood up, walked into the living room. Photo frame, the one on the shelf, the family picture he'd laid face down the week after Joanne's funeral, was standing upright. He hadn't touched it. Lily. She had done it, sometime today without telling anyone, without asking permission. She had walked in the living room and picked up the frame and set it right. Joanne's face looked out into the room. Caleb's face beside her. Lily had a baby between them. His daughter had decided she was ready before he had. He went to the porch. The wind chime hung where it always hung. Copper tubes tarnished green, leather cord dry and stiff, the clapper wired tight against the center post. He stood there for a long time, long enough for the sky to start going gray in the east. Then he reached up and unwound the wire. The first gust came a minute later. Soft, just barely enough. The clapper swung. Tubes rang, a low, clean sound. 5 notes tangled together, the kind of sound that had no melody but didn't need one. It rang again and again. The wind chime had been silent for 3 years, and now it wasn't. Caleb went inside. He took a sheet of construction paper from the kitchen drawer and set it on the table beside the box of crayons. Then he went upstairs and sat on the edge of Lily's bed. "Wake up, baby. I need your help with something." She blinked at him. Her eyes found his face in the half-dark. "Where's Miss Nora?" "She had to go somewhere yesterday. We're going to see her this morning. There's a lawyer who needs to decide something about her daddy's farm. I want you there with me. Will you come?" Lily's eyes went focused. The careful, searching look. "Are we bringing her home?" Caleb's throat did the thing it had done in the kitchen the morning. Nora had told Lily that nobody else gets that job. "I hope so, baby. That's mostly up to her. But I want to ask." Lily got out of bed. She went downstairs in her pajamas and climbed into a chair at the table. She looked at the paper. She looked at the crayons. "Daddy, what do you want me to draw?" "Whatever you want, but you got time for one good one." She picked up the brown crayon first. She drew the farmhouse, the porch, the 2 front windows. A tall figure on the porch stepped with a hat. A figure next to him with long yellow hair. A smaller figure between them holding the rabbit. She wrote her name across the top in her best letters, and underneath, in slightly less careful letters, "Our house." Caleb looked at that drawing for a long time. "That might be the best thing you've ever made," he said. His voice held, barely. Lily tucked the rabbit under her arm. She carried the drawing with both hands the way Shed carried the rabbit the first night, the way she carried everything that mattered. Carefully, close, with the full weight of her attention. Judge Purcell's office sat above the county bank. Narrow stairs, old carpet, the kind of building where the radiator made more noise than the people. Nora was already inside when Caleb came up the stairs with Lily's hand in his. She was sitting in one of the 2 client chairs, white blouse, hair pulled back. The folder on her lap was twice as thick as the envelope Shed carried to his door in the rain. She had built her case the way her father would have, page by page, receipt by receipt, every number in its place. Warren was in the other chair, one ankle crossed over his knee. He was talking to Purcell in the warm, reasonable tone of a man explaining something unfortunate but obvious, that his sister had panicked, that she had entered into an arrangement with a neighbor whose own property was in financial trouble, that she had no real understanding or what it would cost her. Nora was not looking at Warren. She was looking at the door. When it opened, she didn't move, didn't stand, just looked. Caleb came in with his hat in one hand and Lily's small hand in the other. Lily was carrying the drawing the way she carried everything important. Both arms pressed that flat against her chest, the rabbit wedged under her elbow. He felt Nora's eyes go from his face to Lily's face to the paper in Lily's arms. He watched her breath leave in one short pull. Not a gasp, not a sound, just a woman's chest emptying itself of something it had been holding since yesterday afternoon. Warren turned his head, the warm voice cooled by several degrees. "Well, here we go." Caleb walked past him without answering. He stopped behind his chair. He set his hat on the corner of Purcell's desk. He put one hand on Nora's shoulder. Light, brief, a question more than a statement. She didn't move away. "Mr. Purcell," Caleb said. "Sorry we're late." "You're not late, Mr. Dunning. Sit down." Caleb pulled the third chair from the wall, set it on Nora's other side between her and Warren. Lily climbed into his lap on her own, the rabbit against her chest. Purcell removed his glasses, folded them on his notepad. "We're here because Mr. Beckett has filed a formal challenge to the marriage and to his sister's operational authority over the Beckett property. He has asked the estate to review compliance and consider transferring primary control. Mr. Beckett, you've had your turn." "Mrs. Dunning, the floor is yours." Nora opened the folder. She didn't look up once. That was not weakness. That was a woman keeping both hands on her own voice so it wouldn't shake. She laid it out. Paid invoices, veterinary receipts, fuel logs, equipment maintenance records, supplier contracts. She had renegotiated herself, her initials in blue ink at the bottom of each one. Page. A daily operation schedule for the next 30 days, signed by Holt on behalf of the crew, a roof estimate for the South Barn with a deposit already paid. 2 letters from neighboring ranchers, one from Mrs. Fenton at the feed store. Every page in order, every page earned. Warren let out a short laugh. "You got the ranch has to sign a piece of paper. That's adorable." Nora did not look at him. "Don't interrupt me again, Warren." The words were not loud. Broom heard them anyway. Warren's jaw closed. Purcell behind the desk did not react, but the corner of his eye moved, and Caleb caught it. "Nora, turn to not done," she said. She laid Arthur's notebook on the desk. She opened it to the pages with dates and notes in her father's handwriting, the log of every call, every contact, every offer from Dale Morrow going back 22 months. She placed beside it 2 sets of county records, property transfers for the Patterson farm and the Eames parcel, both acquired by Morrow's company at prices significantly below assessed value. "This is not a family disagreement, Mr. Purcell," Nora said. Her voice was steady now, not loud, not shaking, level, the way a voice gets when it's passed through the shaking and come out the other side. "Dale Morrow has purchased 2 properties in this county at 40% below market. Brother, I contacted him while my father was still alive, while my father was still running the farm. My father knew. He documented it, and he put the condition in his will because he understood that the only way to protect this land was to make sure I wasn't standing alone when the pressure came." She closed the folder, placed both hands flat on top of it. "Eam not telling you I have all the answers, Mr. Purcell. Eam telling you the farm is running, bills are current, the fences are repaired, the cattle are accounted for, the crew knows who gives the orders, and this land, my father's land, is not for sale. Not to Dale Morrow, not to anyone." The room for a long second. Then Warren shifted forward in his chair and pointed at Caleb. "And what about him? You're not going to ask about him? A man one bad season from losing his own ranch, sitting here with my sister's daughter on his lap like he belongs in this room? You think this was love, Purcell? This was a transaction, a desperate woman, and a man who needed a lifeboat. Look at him." Lily's hand tightened around Caleb's thumb. Caleb set his hand over hers, gently. He picked her up and stood her on the floor beside his chair. He took the drawing from her hands. He laid it on the corner of the desk where Purcell could see it. Then he spoke, not loudly. He did not stand taller. Then he needed to. He did not raise his voice above the level of a man talking to another man across the table. My father told me one thing, more than he told me anything else, Caleb said. He said the measure of a man isn't in what he holds, take it, in what he's willing to stand beside when standing there costs him something. He looked at Purcell. Arthur Beckett was one of a handful of people in this county who treated my family like we mattered, not as neighbors, not as the black family across the road, as people. When my father was dying, Arthur walked across his own pasture with a tin of his wife's cookies and sat with my mother until she could breathe again. When my wife passed, Arthur sat on my porch for 3 evenings straight, didn't say one useless word, didn't bring advice, just sat there and let me be broken without trying to fix it. The room was very quiet. I didn't marry Nora for her acreage, Mr. Purcell. I have acreage. It's thin. Her brother is correct about that. 2 payments behind on the equipment loan. I won't pretend otherwise. I married Nora because I owed Arthur Beckett a debt that no property line could settle. And because for the first time in 3 years, my daughter came downstairs in the morning and laughed because a woman she barely knew was sitting at our kitchen table. And that was enough. He turned to Warren, looked at him, held it. You want to call that a transaction? Go ahead. File it with whatever court will listen. But you will not once more, not ever, say in front of my daughter that what I feel for my wife is something I invented. Are we clear? Warren did not answer. Looked at it. The brown crayon house, the porch, the 3 figures, the rabbit, the 2 words at the bottom in a 6-year-old's best handwriting. He set it back down with the care of a man handling something that had been entered into evidence. I have known the Beckett family the better part of my professional career, Purcell said. I reviewed this will with Arthur personally. I do not believe he included the condition in question as a formality, and I do not believe he named Mr. Dunning in his personal letter by accident. The marriage license satisfies the stated condition. The operational record satisfies the implied one. Mrs. Dunning retains primary control of the Beckett property, effective immediately. The challenge is dismissed. Nora closed her eyes, just once, blink that lasted 3 seconds. Warren stood. His chair scraped the floor hard enough to rattle the window glass. You'll both regret this, he said. Nora looked up at him. Her eyes were wet. Her voice was not. Maybe, but it'll be my regret, not yours. Not anymore. He grabbed his coat and left. The door swung shut behind him. The glass shivered in the frame and then went still. Purcell slid the drawing back across the desk to Lily. Young lady, he said, that is an excellent piece of work. Thank you, Lily said. She took it with both hands. Outside, the air had the clean, uncertain feel of a day that hadn't made up its mind yet. Caleb walked Nora and Lily down the narrow stairs and out onto the sidewalk. The town moved around them, a truck backing out of the hardware lot, someone sweeping the steps of the post office, the ordinary machinery of a Wednesday morning that did not know or care what had just happened in the room above the bank. Nora stopped at the passenger door of Caleb's truck. She didn't get in. Why did you come? She said. The farm was going to be lost. You didn't have to show up. Caleb set Lily on the running board so she was eye level with both of them. He took off his hat. I came because she asked me a question the other afternoon and I didn't answer it. And then I sat at the kitchen table all night with your note in front of me, and I finally understood why I didn't answer. Nora's eyes were already wet. She didn't try to stop it this time. Joanne told me something once, Caleb said. Near the end, she was standing at the sink, folding a towel. And she said it like she was telling me where Shed put the car keys. She said, turn fear into a reason not to love. That's the one job I'm giving you. Don't waste it. He took a breath. Let it out. I've been wasting it for 3 years. I told myself it was because of Lily. Some of it was. Most of it was just me, standing on the other side of a door I'd locked myself, pretending the lock was keeping me safe when all it was doing was keeping me alone. He looked at Nora. You showed up at my door because you needed a name on a license. I said yes, because I owed your father, and because my daughter walked downstairs at midnight and handed you the one thing she loves most in this world without being asked. I did not know that night that I had needed you for longer than you'd needed me. I worked that out somewhere around the middle of the 2nd week. The rest of it I worked out last night, sitting at that table, holding your note. He looked down at Lily. I need to ask you something, baby. Honest answer. Lily looked at Nora, then at Caleb P. Then at Nora again, the long, careful look of a child who has already decided but wants to make sure the adults are ready. Do you want Miss Nora to come home with us? Yes. One word. No hesitation, the whole courthouse sidewalk in it. Nora's face broke, not loudly, not dramatically, the way faces break in real life, which is slowly and starting with the mouth. She knelt down on the pavement in her white blouse, right there on the sidewalk in front of the bank and the hardware store, and anyone in this town who wanted to watch, and Lily stepped off the running board into her arms and wrapped both hands around her neck. Couldn't. Didn't say anything. Then, into Lily's hair, almost too quiet to hear. "I'm sorry I left yesterday, sweetheart. It's okay. Daddy told me you weren't faking. He just didn't know how to say the other part yet." Nora laughed. Half a laugh, half something that had no name. She pressed her forehead against Lily's and stayed there. Caleb stood with his hat in his hand and watched them, and a thing he had been carrying in his chest for 3 years, heavy, sharp-edged, the kind of weight a man gets so used to that he forgets it, isn't part of his body, set itself down beside him, quiet, tired. Animal finally lies down at your feet and stays. They drove home with Lily in the middle on her booster, drawing on her lap, rabbit on the drawing. The sun came through west of the river and laid itself across the wet fields in long, flat bars of gold. They passed the fence line where the Dunning property met the Beckett property, the one that had outlasted both their fathers and more weather than either of them could remember. Lily was asleep before they reached the cattle gate. Caleb stopped the truck in the drive, engine running. Nora was looking through the windshield at the farmhouse porch, the chair where Arthur had sat in silence the week Joanne died, the copper wind chime turning slow in the breeze. She heard it before she saw it, the soft, clean ring of the chime. 5 notes, tangled and imperfect, carried on the wind. She looked at Caleb. He looked at the porch. "I untied it last night," he said. Figured it had been quiet long enough. Nora didn't answer, but her hand found his across Lily's sleeping head. "I walked into this thinking I was keeping your father's land standing," Caleb said quietly, so as not to wake his daughter. "Took me until last night to realize I was rebuilding my own ground." Nora turned her hand over and laced her fingers through his. She held on. "Say it again," she said, "so I can keep it." "I love you, Nora. I love my wife." That's the true answer to the question my daughter asked me. She closed her eyes. A tear ran down the side of her nose. She didn't wipe it. She leaned across the booster, careful of Lily, and kissed his cheek. Slow, deliberate, the way a person kisses something they intend to hold on to. Caleb put the truck in gear, rolled the rest of the way up the drive. He carried Lily inside, played her. On the couch under the crochet, Rose mother had made the last winter before her hands got too stiff. Nora stood in the kitchen doorway and looked at it all. The table, where Shed cried over coffee on her first night. The window above the sink. The braided mat by the front door that was still holding up after all these years. "This is a good house," she said. The same words Shed said the first afternoon. But they sounded different now. Pace sounded like an address. "This place makes more sense with you standing in it," Caleb said. She crossed the kitchen and put her arms around his middle and laid her ear against his chest. He folded her in, rested his chin on the top of her head. Outside, the wind chime rang. Soft, clear, unhurried. 5 copper notes finding each other in the open air. Caleb. For the first time in 3 years, when Caleb looked out across his land, he did not feel like a man standing alone on a porch. And for the first time in her life, when Nora looked out at the fields where Shed grown up, she felt all the way through like she was home. Here's the thing about doors. Most of us spend our lives deciding which ones to keep shut. We close the door on someone we lost, poured. We close the door on the version of ourselves that used to believe in things. We close the door on second chances because the first one left a scar, and scars make good excuses. And then, on some ordinary night, in ordinary rain, somebody we barely know stands on the other side and knocks. Caleb and Nora's story isn't really about a farm. It isn't about a deadline or a will or a brother with a real estate deal. Pocked. It's about 2 people who had every reason to stay closed up and chose not to. About a little girl who handed over a stuffed rabbit at midnight because she could see faster than either grown-up in the room that the woman at the kitchen table needed it more. Prater. About a man who had to be reminded by his On dark by a wind chime he'd silenced, by a photograph she set upright when he wasn't looking. That holding still is not the same thing as being safe. If you're still here, and I hope you are, I'd like to hear from you. Has there ever been a knock at your door, literal or otherwise, that turned out to be the beginning of something you didn't know you were waiting for? Who was the Arthur in your life? The quiet one who showed up, said almost nothing, and changed everything by being there. Your stories are why these stories get made. So leave one. It matters. And if this is the kind of story that stays with you, the slow ones, the honest ones, about ordinary people finding their way back to each other, hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Applaud. A like or a share helps this reach someone who might need to hear it tonight. Thank you for staying with Caleb and Nora and Lily all the way through. Look after each other out there. And whatever you do this week, untie the wind chime.